By the time this story ends, a millionaire CEO named Irving Dahl will have discovered something that changes everything he thought he knew about fatherhood, love, and what it truly means to be rich. But first, let me take you back to where it all began. On a cold Tuesday evening in November, when a 6-year-old boy sat alone under an old oak tree, creating something beautiful that no one would see. Picture this, a massive estate in Connecticut, where autumn leaves dance in the wind like memories trying to find their way home. The mansion stands proud against the darkening sky, its 15 rooms glowing with warm light, yet somehow feeling as empty as a forgotten promise. In his corner office on the second floor, 38-year-old Irving Dahl stands motionless, a crystal tumbler of aged whiskey in his hand, staring down at his son through bulletproof glass. His Armani suit hangs perfectly on his lean frame, his dark hair showing just the slightest touch of silver at the temples, the only evidence of the weight he carries. Below in the garden, little Finn Dahl kneels on the damp earth, his small hands carefully arranging fallen maple leaves into the shape of a heart. The boy's blonde hair catches the last rays of sunlight, and his tongue pokes out slightly in concentration, the same expression his mother used to make when she was focused on something important. But here's what breaks your heart. Irving watches his son through security monitors, as if the child were a stranger living in his home. 2 floors, 43 steps, and an entire universe of emotional distance separate them. Finn completes his masterpiece. A perfect heart made of crimson and gold leaves, each one placed with the precision of someone desperate to create something beautiful in a world that often feels broken. He looks up toward his father's office window, and for just one moment, one precious, fleeting moment, their eyes meet through the glass. The little boy raises his hand in a tentative wave, hope lighting up his face like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Irving sees the gesture. His jaw tightens. His grip on the whiskey glass becomes white-knuckled. And then, he turns away. Finn's hand slowly drops to his side. He looks down at his leaf heart, and in a voice so quiet it's barely a whisper, he says the words that would haunt any parent's dreams. "Daddy." No one hears him. No one comes. The wind picks up, scattering a few leaves from his creation, and Finn carefully rebuilds it, piece by piece, as if fixing the heart could somehow fix everything else that feels broken in his small world. This is where our story begins, with a father who has everything money can buy, and a son who would trade it all for just one hug, one bedtime story, one sign that he matters more than the next business deal. You see, Irving Dahl hadn't always been this way. Let me tell you about the man Irving used to be before grief turned his heart to stone. 6 years ago, he was different. He laughed easily, loved deeply, and dreamed of teaching his son to throw a baseball, to drive a car, to navigate the complicated waters of growing up. He had a wife named Elena, a woman whose smile could light up entire rooms and whose laugh sounded like music playing in another dimension. Elena died, giving birth to Finn. For 8 hours and 37 minutes, Irving stood in that sterile hospital corridor, watching doctors rush in and out of the delivery room like actors in a tragedy he never auditioned for. He held his newborn son for the first time while his wife's body grew cold just 20 feet away. That night, something inside Irving broke so completely that he's never quite figured out how to put the pieces back together. Now, he's the CEO of Medicore, a medical technology empire worth $12 billion, with branches in 14 countries and the power to save lives on a global scale. Ironic, isn't it? A man who owns companies that heal people but can't heal himself. His mansion operates like a 5-star hotel run by ghosts. Margaret, the 60-year-old housekeeper, has worked for the family since before Finn was born. She's kind, efficient, and treats the little boy with the gentle affection of a grandmother. But even she maintains that professional distance that keeps everyone at arm's length. There's James, the driver, who takes Finn to school every morning while Irving is already locked away in conference calls with Tokyo. There's Sarah, the personal assistant, who schedules Irving's life down to the minute but couldn't tell you his son's favorite color if her job depended on it. Every morning follows the same heartbreaking routine. Finn eats breakfast in the kitchen with Margaret, chattering about his dreams and asking questions about everything from why the sky is blue to whether fish get thirsty. His father eats alone in his office, reviewing financial reports and pretending he doesn't hear the sound of his son's laughter echoing through the halls. By the time Irvian emerges from his fortress of paperwork and profits, Finn is already asleep, tucked in a bed by Margaret with stories about brave princes and magical kingdoms. Stories a little boy should be hearing from his daddy. This has been their life for 6 years. Two people living in the same house, but existing in completely different worlds. But everything was about to change, because Dr. Morrison was about to make a phone call that would crack open the walls Irvian had built around his heart. Mr. Dahl, the family physician, said that Tuesday afternoon, his voice carrying the weight of professional concern. "We need to talk about Finn's asthma. It's getting worse, and I'm afraid the current management isn't sufficient. The boy needs more than medication. He needs someone who understands both medical care and the emotional needs of a child who's been through trauma." Trauma. The word hit Irvian like a physical blow. What trauma? He'd given his son everything. The best schools, the finest clothes, toys that most children only dream about. "What are you suggesting?" Irvian asked, though something deep in his chest already knew the answer. He needs a pediatric nurse. Someone qualified, someone who can be there when the attacks happen, someone who understands that sometimes the best medicine is simply knowing you're not alone. That conversation lasted 17 minutes. It would take Irvian 3 days to make the call that would bring Zelia Morin into their lives. He had no idea he was about to hire the woman who would teach both him and his son what it really means to breathe. When Zelia Morin stepped out of the taxi that carried her to the Dahl estate, she paused for a moment to look up at the imposing mansion before her. Not because she was intimidated. Lord knows she'd seen enough wealth and power in her 15 years as a pediatric nurse to know that money doesn't guarantee happiness. But because she could feel something in the air around this place. A sadness so thick you could almost touch it. At 35, Zelia carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen life's hardest moments and chose compassion anyway. Her natural hair formed a beautiful crown of curls around her face, and her brown eyes held the kind of wisdom that only comes from understanding both healing and heartbreak. She wore simple clothes. Dark jeans, a soft blue sweater, comfortable shoes that had walked countless hospital corridors, and carried a single bag containing everything she thought she'd need for this assignment. She had no idea she was walking into a situation that would require all the love she'd been storing up in her heart for the past 19 years. Margaret opened the door before Zelia could knock, as if the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment. "You must be Miss Morin," the housekeeper said, and there was something in her voice, relief, maybe, or hope. "Mr. Dahl is waiting for you in his study." The interview took place in a room that felt more like a museum than a home office. Irvian sat behind a desk the size of a small car, surrounded by awards, certificates, and photographs of himself shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers. Notably absent were any pictures of his son. "Please sit," he said, not bothering to look up from the folder containing her credentials. "Your qualifications are impressive. Johns Hopkins, 15 years of pediatric experience, specialization in respiratory conditions." "Thank you," Zelia replied, studying the man before her. She saw past the expensive suit and commanding presence to something else, exhaustion, maybe, or fear wearing the mask of control. "I have one primary concern," Irvian continued, finally meeting her eyes. "Do you have experience with children who are difficult to reach?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Zelia leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm when she responded. "Mr. Dahl, in 15 years of working with sick children, I've learned something important. There are no difficult children. There are only children who've been hurt, and children who've learned that the world isn't always safe. Those children aren't difficult. They're protecting themselves the only way they know how." Irvian stopped pretending to read her file. For the first time in the conversation, he was actually listening. "Your son isn't difficult," Zelia continued. He's 6 years old, dealing with a chronic illness, and missing something that no amount of money can buy. He's not difficult, he's lonely. The silence that followed lasted exactly 43 seconds. Irvian counted them, the way he counted everything else in his life, trying to maintain control even as this stranger spoke truths that made his chest tight. "When can you start?" he asked. The first meeting between Zelia and Finn happened 20 minutes later, and it was nothing like what either of them expected. Finn had been hiding behind the curved staircase in the main foyer, peeking around the polished banister to catch glimpses of the new stranger in his house. He'd heard Margaret whispering to James about a nurse for the young master, and the word made his stomach feel funny. Nurses meant hospitals, and hospitals meant scary machines and people in white coats who spoke in hushed voices about things he didn't understand. But this woman didn't look scary at all. Zelia knew the boy was watching her. She could feel his presence the way you feel sunlight on your skin, warm, tentative, hopeful. So instead of calling out to him or asking Margaret to bring him over, she did something unexpected. She sat down on the marble floor of the grand foyer, right there in her nice clothes, and opened her small purse. From it, she pulled out a handful of colorful wrapped candies, the kind nurses keep in their pockets for brave little patients, and began arranging them on the floor in front of her. First, she made a circle, then a square. Then, with careful precision, she began creating the outline of a star. "This is tricky," she said to herself, loud enough for hidden ears to hear. "I'm trying to make a constellation, but I think I need an expert astronomer to help me." Behind the staircase, Finn's eyes widened. He knew about constellations. He had a book about them in his room, with pictures of Orion and the Big Dipper and stories about how the stars got their names. Very slowly, like a wild animal deciding whether to trust, Finn emerged from his hiding place. He didn't come close, not yet, but he positioned himself where Zelia could see him if she looked up. "That's Cassiopeia," he said quietly, pointing to her candy arrangement. "It looks like a W in the sky." Zelia looked up and smiled. Not the big, fake smile adults sometimes use when they were trying too hard, but a real one that reached her eyes and made tiny crinkles at the corners. "You're absolutely right," she said. "I was hoping someone who knew about stars would help me. I'm Zelia, by the way. What's your name?" "Finn," he whispered, taking one small step closer. "That's a strong name," Zelia said, returning her attention to the candies. "Would you like to help me make more constellations, Finn? I have enough candy here to make a whole galaxy." And just like that, without fanfare or force, a bridge began to form between a woman who dedicated her life to healing children and a little boy who'd been waiting 6 years for someone to really see him. They spent the next hour on that marble floor, creating candy constellations and sharing stories about wishes made on shooting stars. That first evening, as golden hour painted the mansion in shades of amber and rose, Zelia learned the rhythm of the doll household. Dinner was served promptly at 6. Finn in the breakfast nook with Margaret, Irvian nowhere to be seen. Bath time at 7, supervised by Margaret while Zelia observed, learning the little rituals that helped Finn feel safe. Story time at 8, though Margaret admitted she wasn't much good at doing the different voices. "I could read to him tonight," Zelia offered gently, "if that's all right with you." And with Finn, Margaret's relief was palpable. "Oh, would you? The child does love his stories, and I'm afraid my old voice isn't as animated as it used to be." Finn's room was a study in contrasts. Expensive toys arranged with museum-like precision, but also a collection of drawings taped to one wall, clearly the work of small hands trying to make sense of a big world. Zelia noticed that in every picture, there were always 2 figures, a small one and a taller one with curly hair. Never 3. "What story would you like tonight?" she asked, settling into the chair beside his race car bed. "The one about the knight who saves the dragon," Finn said, snuggling under covers that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "The knight saves the dragon?" Zelia asked, intrigued. "That's different from the usual story." "Yeah," Finn nodded seriously. "Because the dragon isn't really mean. He's just lonely and scared, and he breathes fire because he doesn't know how to tell people he wants to be friends. So the knight doesn't fight him. He just sits with him until the dragon feels safe enough to stop breathing fire. Zelia's heart squeezed tight. She looked at this wise little boy and saw so much of herself at that age. The child who'd learned too early that sometimes the monsters in stories are just creatures who need love. "That's a beautiful story," she whispered. "Did you make it up yourself?" Finn nodded. "Margaret says I have a good imagination, but sometimes I think the knight gets tired of sitting with the dragon. Sometimes I think he wants to leave." The weight of that statement settled over Zelia like a blanket made of sadness and truth. She reached over and gently brushed a strand of hair from Finn's forehead. "You know what I think?" she said softly. "I think the best knights are the ones who never get tired of sitting with dragons, because they understand that everyone, even dragons, deserves to have someone who won't walk away." As she read him the story he'd requested, Zelia noticed that Finn's breathing became slightly labored. Not dangerous, but enough to make her reach for the inhaler on his nightstand and have him take a precautionary puff. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" he asked as she tucked him in again. "Of course," she replied, settling back into the chair. But at 10:30, when Margaret came to check on them, she found something that made her heart both break and soar at the same time. Finn was fast asleep, his small hand reaching across the space between bed and chair to rest trustingly in Zelia's palm. And this woman who was still a virtual stranger was humming a soft lullaby, her thumb gently stroking the back of his hand. "He's never done that before," Margaret whispered. "Done what?" "Reach for someone. Ask someone to stay. In 6 years, I've never seen him trust anyone that quickly." It was at that moment, as Margaret's words hung in the air like a prayer answered, that they heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, measured steps that belonged to a man who'd just come home from another 18-hour day of building his empire. Irvian appeared in the doorway, still in his business suit, his tie loosened but his guard still firmly in place. He stopped short when he saw the scene before him. His son sleeping peacefully, holding hands with the woman he'd hired just hours before. "How is he?" Irvian asked quietly. "He's perfect," Zelia replied, not letting go of Finn's hand. "His breathing is good. His fever broke around 9, and he told me the most amazing story about a knight who saves dragons instead of fighting them." Something flickered across Irvian's face. Surprise, maybe a recognition. "He's always been good with stories." "He's good with a lot of things," Zelia said, looking directly at him. "He's smart, creative, empathetic, and incredibly brave. You should be proud." Irvian stared at her for a long moment, as if she'd spoken a foreign language he was trying to translate. Then Finn stirred in his sleep, murmuring something that sounded like "Daddy," and Irvian's expression shuddered again. "I'll be in my office if you need anything," he said, and disappeared as quietly as he'd come. But neither Margaret nor Zelia missed the way he'd paused in the doorway, looking back at his sleeping son with an expression of such raw longing that it could have broken hearts across 3 counties. That night, as Zelia finally settled into the guest room that would be her home for the foreseeable future, she whispered a prayer she hadn't said since she was 16 years old. "Please, God, help me help them find each other." She had no idea that 3 floors down, Irvian was standing in his office, staring at a photograph he kept hidden in his desk drawer, a picture of Elena holding their newborn son, both of them looking at the camera with expressions of such pure joy that it hurt to look at. "I don't know how to do this without you," he whispered to the photograph, the way he did every night when the world was quiet enough to hear the sound of his heart breaking. In the morning, everything would change. But tonight, for the first time in 6 years, everyone in the doll house slept soundly, as if the presence of one woman with a gift for healing had somehow made the whole world feel a little bit safer. The next morning arrived with the kind of October sunshine that makes everything look like it's been painted with liquid gold. Zelia woke to the sound of small feet padding down the hallway, not running, but moving with the careful deliberation of a child who'd learned to be quiet in his own home. She found Finn in the kitchen, sitting at the breakfast bar with a bowl of cereal and a glass of orange juice, swinging his legs while Margaret bustled around preparing what looked like enough food for a small army. "Good morning, sweetheart," Zelia said, ruffling his hair as she passed. "How did you sleep?" "Really good," Finn said, his face lighting up like she'd just given him the best news in the world. I dreamed about the knight and the dragon, and they were friends, and they built a castle together where other lonely dragons could come live. That sounds like a wonderful dream, Zelia replied, accepting the cup of coffee Margaret handed her with a grateful smile. Maybe we could draw some pictures of that castle later. Really? Finn's eyes went wide. You want to draw with me? The question hit Zelia square in the chest. How long had it been since someone had wanted to do something creative with this child? How long since anyone had shown genuine interest in the worlds he built in his imagination? I would love to draw with you, she said firmly. But first, let's talk about today's adventure. What do you usually do on Wednesdays? School, Finn said, his enthusiasm dimming slightly. But I don't really like it there. The other kids think I'm weird because I can't run around as much, and sometimes I have to use my inhaler, and they stare at me like I'm some kind of alien. Margaret's face tightened with protective anger, and Zelia made a mental note to have a conversation with Finn's teachers about creating a more inclusive environment for children with chronic illnesses. Well, she said, sitting down beside him, what if I told you that some of the most interesting people in the world are the ones other people think are weird? Einstein was weird. Mozart was weird. Dr. Seuss was definitely weird. Being different isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of. Really? Really. And you know what? I bet if those other kids took the time to get to know you, they'd realize how lucky they are to have someone like you as a friend. It was at that moment that Irvian walked into the kitchen. He stopped short, clearly not expecting to find a scene of domestic warmth where there was usually only the efficient silence of Margaret preparing his coffee and briefing him on the day's schedule. Finn was laughing at something Zelia had said, his whole face animated in a way Irvian hadn't seen in, well, maybe ever. Good morning, Mr. Dahl, Zelia said, standing up. I was just telling Finn about some famous people who were considered different. Daddy, Finn said, scrambling down from his stool. Did you know that Dr. Seuss's real name was Theodore Seuss Geisel? And he wrote 46 books. Zelia says being weird is actually cool. Irvian looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw something that made his breath catch. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. The kind he remembered from his own childhood, but had forgotten his son was capable of. That's interesting, he said awkwardly, not sure how to respond to this version of Finn who was confident enough to share facts and opinions with enthusiasm. Maybe you could have breakfast with us? Finn asked hopefully. Zelia was going to tell me more stories about weird, famous people. The request hung in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Irvian's instinct was to retreat, to mumble something about important calls and disappear into his office. But something about the way Zelia was looking at him, not judging, not pushing, just waiting, made him hesitate. I suppose I have a few minutes, he said finally, settling onto one of the stools of the breakfast bar. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. For 23 minutes, the Dahl family had breakfast together. Really together. Finn chattered about his dreams and his plans for the castle drawings. Zelia shared stories about the children she'd worked with over the years, making each one sound like a hero in their own adventure. And Irvian, slowly, carefully, like a man learning to walk again after a long illness, began to participate in the conversation. You know, he said when Finn mentioned wanting to be an inventor someday, I wanted to be an inventor when I was your age. I was going to create a machine that could turn vegetables into candy. Finn's eyes went wide. You wanted to be an inventor? What happened? I grew up, Irvian said, and there was something wistful in his voice that made both Zelia and Margaret exchange glances. But maybe it's not too late to remember what that felt like. When James arrived to take Finn to school, the little boy did something that shocked everyone in the room. He hugged his father goodbye. Not a quick, obligatory hug, but a real one, arms wrapped tight around Irvian's waist, face pressed against his expensive suit jacket. I love you, Daddy, he whispered, so quietly that only Irvian could hear. Irvian's arms came up automatically, encircling his son's small frame, and for just a moment, his carefully constructed walls crumbled completely. I love you too, buddy, he whispered back, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. After Finn left for school, The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of Margaret cleaning dishes and trying not to cry. Irvian stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the door his son had just walked through. "He hugged me," he said, as if he couldn't quite believe it had happened. "He's been waiting 6 years for you to let him," Zelia said gently. Irvian turned to look at her. This woman who'd been in his house for less than 24 hours and had already worked what felt like magic. "How?" he asked. "How did you do that?" "I didn't do anything," Zelia replied. "I just saw him, really saw him, and I let him see me too." Children are amazing that way. They respond to authenticity. They can tell when someone genuinely cares about them, and they can tell when someone is just going through the motions. "I don't know how to do this," Irvian admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be what he needs." "You don't have to be perfect," Zelia said. "You just have to be present. You just have to try. And from what I saw this morning, you're already doing better than you think." That afternoon, when Finn came home from school, he found his father waiting in the living room with a set of art supplies and a large sheet of white paper spread out on the coffee table. "I thought maybe we could work on that castle," Irvian said, his voice uncertain but hopeful. "The one from your dream?" "I'm not much of an artist, but I'd like to try." The picture they created together that day was far from perfect. Irvian's dragons looked more like deformed lizards, and Finn's castle towers were slightly crooked. But when they were finished, they had something neither of them had possessed that morning. A shared memory, a moment of connection, a tiny crack in the wall that had separated them for so long. That night, as Zelia tucked Finn into bed, he asked her a question that would stay with her for the rest of her life. "Zelia," he said, his voice small and wondering, "do you think my daddy might start loving me the way you do?" And in that moment, Zelia understood the true scope of her mission in this house. She wasn't just here to manage a child's asthma. She was here to help a family remember how to breathe. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Real change never does. But over the next 2 weeks, the doll household began to shift and settle into new rhythms, like a song finding its key after being played in discord for too long. Mornings became something to look forward to. Irvian started coming down to the kitchen 15 minutes earlier, claiming he needed to review his schedule with Margaret, but really just wanted to hear Finn's sleep-rumpled voice sharing his dreams and plans for the day. Zelia would make pancakes shaped like animals, and Finn would try to guess what each one was before eating it, making increasingly ridiculous guesses just to hear his father laugh. "That's obviously a giraffe," Irvian would say, pointing to a particularly lumpy pancake. "No way, Daddy. That's clearly a submarine with extra periscopes." Finn would insist, giggling so hard he could barely breathe. And Zelia would watch them both, her heart expanding with something she'd never experienced before, the joy of watching a family rediscover itself. The afternoons brought new adventures. Zelia established exploration time between Finn's return from school and dinner. Sometimes they'd walk through the estate's gardens, identifying birds and collecting interesting leaves. Other times they'd set up elaborate obstacle courses in the living room, adapted for Finn's limitations, but challenging enough to make him feel capable and strong. But the most magical times were when Eriquint joined them. It started accidentally. Irvian came home early one Tuesday to find Finn and Zelia in the library, engaged in what appeared to be a very serious scientific experiment involving baking soda, vinegar, and food coloring. "We're making volcanoes," Finn announced proudly. Zelia says that mountains can explode, but it's not scary. It's just the Earth's way of letting out pressure when it builds up too much inside. "Is that so?" Irvian said, loosening his tie and setting down his briefcase. Something about the scene, the complete absorption on his son's face, the patient way Zelia explained each step of the process, the sheer normalcy of it all, made him want to stay. "Want to help us make the next one?" Zelia asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for a billionaire CEO to spend his afternoon playing with kitchen chemistry. "I don't really know anything about volcanoes," Irvian said hesitantly. "That's okay," Finn said seriously. "I didn't know anything about them this morning either. But now I know lots of things, like how they're formed and why they erupt, and how people who study them are called volcanologists." "Volcanologists," Irvian corrected gently. That's what I said. Finn grinned, and Irvian felt something warm unfurl in his chest. The simple pleasure of being corrected by his son and not minding it at all. They spent the next hour creating an entire volcanic mountain range on the library table, complete with villages made from blocks and tiny plastic dinosaurs that had to evacuate when the mountains exploded. Irvian found himself getting completely absorbed in the narrative they were building together, contributing ideas and asking questions as if he were 6 years old again himself. You know, he said as they cleaned up the colorful mess they'd made, when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a volcanologist. I had books about Pompeii and Mount Vesuvius, and I used to dream about traveling to see real volcanoes. Really? Finn's eyes went wide. What made you stop wanting to do that? It was such an innocent question, but it hit Irvian like a physical blow. What had made him stop? When had he decided that dreams were impractical, that imagination was a luxury he couldn't afford? I guess I forgot, he said quietly. I got so busy with other things that I forgot what it felt like to wonder about volcanoes. Well, Finn said practically, you could remember now. We could look up real volcanoes on the computer and maybe even plan a trip to see one someday. The idea of traveling somewhere just for the joy of exploration, of sharing an adventure with his son, was so foreign to Irvian that he almost dismissed it automatically. But then he caught Zalia's eye, and she smiled at him with such warmth and encouragement that he found himself nodding. Yeah, he said, his voice stronger now. Maybe we could do that. That night, after Finn was asleep, Irvian found himself standing in his home office, staring at the bookshelves that lined the walls. Somewhere up there, buried behind years of business journals and financial reports, were his old books about volcanoes and earthquakes and the wonders of the natural world. He spent an hour digging through dusty boxes until he found them. Childhood treasures he'd kept but never looked at, dreams he'd preserved but never revisited. As he flipped through the pages, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about the possibility of learning something new, not for profit or advantage, but just for the pure joy of knowing. The next morning, he brought one of the books down to breakfast. I found this last night, he said, setting it beside Finn's cereal bowl. I thought maybe we could plan our volcano expedition. Finn's shriek of delight was so loud that Margaret came running from the laundry room, convinced someone was hurt. Instead, she found father and son bent over the book together, pointing at pictures and reading aloud about the Ring of Fire and the most active volcanoes in the world. We could go to Hawaii, Finn said excitedly. Look, they have volcanoes that are still active, but they're not dangerous. We could see real lava. That's a pretty big trip, Irvian said, but he was smiling as he said it. We'd have to plan carefully, make sure we have all your medical supplies, find doctors there in case you need them, but we could do it, Finn asked hopefully. We could do it, Irvian confirmed, and the happiness on his son's face was worth more than any business deal he'd ever closed. It was Zalia who suggested they start smaller, a trip to the Natural History Museum in New York City, just an hour away, where they could see exhibits about volcanoes and earthquakes and the formation of the earth. We could make it a whole day, she said. Museum in the morning, lunch somewhere fun, maybe a walk through Central Park in the afternoon. Could we really? Finn asked, bouncing in his seat. All of us together, Irvian confirmed, and realized that the thought of spending an entire day with his son and Zalia didn't terrify him the way it would have just a few weeks ago. In fact, he was looking forward to it. The Saturday of their museum adventure dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn sunshine that makes everything look like a painting. Finn was up before dawn, too excited to sleep, making lists of everything he wanted to see and do. We need to see the dinosaurs, he told Zalia as she helped him pack his backpack with inhalers, snacks, and emergency medications. And the planetarium, and the volcano exhibit, and the rocks and minerals, and the ocean hall with the big whale. That's a lot to see in one day, Zalia said, checking his inhaler one more time. We might have to spread it out over several visits. Several visits? Finn's eyes lit up. You mean we can go back? As many times as you want, Irvian said from the doorway, dressed in jeans and a sweater instead of his usual business attire. He looked younger somehow, more relaxed, like he'd shed his CEO persona along with his expensive suits. The drive to the city was filled with Finn's chatter and questions, but for the first time, Irvian didn't feel the urge to tune out or check his phone. Instead, he found himself actively participating in the conversation, sharing stories about his own childhood visits to the museum and making plans for their day. At the museum, they spent 4 hours exploring, and Irvian was amazed by how different everything looked through his son's eyes. Finn approached each exhibit with wonder and curiosity, asking thoughtful questions and making connections between different displays. "Look, Daddy," he said, standing in front of a model of Mount Vesuvius. "This is the volcano that buried Pompeii. Remember from your book?" "I remember," Irvian said, kneeling down beside his son. "What do you think it would have been like to live there when it happened?" They spent 20 minutes discussing the eruption, with Finn coming up with increasingly elaborate theories about how the people might have escaped, and Irvian finding himself drawn into the kind of imaginative speculation he hadn't indulged in for decades. At lunch, in a small cafe overlooking Central Park, Finn made an announcement that changed everything. "This is the best day ever," he said, swinging his legs and taking a big bite of his grilled cheese sandwich. "I wish every day could be like this." "Like what?" Zelia asked. "Like a family," Finn said simply. "Like we're all together and we all love each other and nobody has to be alone." The words hung in the air between them, honest and uncomplicated in the way that only children can be. Irvian felt something shift inside his chest, a wall crumbling that he'd spent 6 years building. "I wish that too," he said quietly, reaching across the table to squeeze his son's hand. "And you know what? Maybe we can make that happen." That night, as they drove home through the gathering dusk, Finn fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the best day of his young life. In the front seat, Irvian and Zelia rode in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the day and what it meant for their future. "Thank you," Irvian said finally, his voice soft so as not to wake Finn. "For what?" "For giving me my son back," he said. "For showing me what I was missing. For helping me remember who I used to be before I forgot how to be happy." You didn't forget," Zelia said gently. "You just buried it under a lot of pain and fear. But it was always there, waiting for you to be ready to find it again." As they pulled into the circular drive of the Dahl estate, Irvian looked at the mansion he'd called home for 6 years and realized that for the first time, it actually felt like one. Change was coming to the Dahl family, whether they were ready for it or not. But for the first time in years, Irvian wasn't afraid of what that change might bring. 3 weeks after the museum trip, on a Tuesday that started like any other, everything fell apart. The morning had been perfect. One of those golden October days when the leaves seemed to glow like stained glass, and the air held just enough crispness to remind you that winter was coming. Finn had eaten his Mickey Mouse pancakes with his usual enthusiasm, chattering about a presentation he was giving at school about volcanoes. Irvian had listened with genuine interest, offering suggestions and promising to help practice that evening. "Remember," Zelia said as she walked into the car where James waited, "if you start feeling tight in your chest during your presentation, just pause and take 3 deep breaths. Everyone will think you're being dramatic for effect." Finn giggled. "Like I'm an actor." "Exactly like you're an actor," she agreed, kissing the top of his head. "Break a leg, sweetheart." It was 2:47 p.m. when Zelia's phone rang. She was in the garden, deadheading the last of the season's roses and thinking about how much Finn would enjoy helping her plant spring bulbs next month. The sound of her phone cut through the peaceful afternoon like a knife through silk. "Miss Morin?" The voice was tense, professional, scared. "This is Nancy Peterson, the school nurse at Bright Minds Academy. You need to come immediately. Finn is having a severe asthma attack." The world tilted sideways. Zelia's training kicked in even as her heart lurched into her throat. "How severe?" she asked, already running toward the house. "What triggered it? What interventions have you tried? His rescue inhaler isn't working. We called 911. The paramedics are on their way, but his oxygen saturation is dropping and he's starting to panic, which is making it worse." "I'm coming," Zelia said, grabbing her keys and the emergency medical kit she kept in her car. "Keep him as calm as you can. Use the nebulizer if you have one. and call his father. Tell him to meet us at St. Mary's Hospital. The 20-minute drive to Finn's school took 8 minutes. Zelia arrived just as the paramedics were loading a small figure on a stretcher into the back of an ambulance. Even from across the parking lot, she could hear the terrible sound of Finn struggling to breathe, the kind of wheeze that made every parent's worst nightmare seem possible. "I'm his nurse," she told the paramedic, climbing into the ambulance without waiting for permission. "Zelia Morin, I have his complete medical history and emergency medications." Finn's eyes found hers through the oxygen mask they'd placed over his face. His lips were blue, his skin pale and clammy, but the relief in his eyes when he saw her was unmistakable. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, taking his hand and trying to project calm even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm here. You're going to be okay." The ride to the hospital was a blur of medical interventions and vital signs and radio chatter between the paramedics and the emergency room. Zelia held Finn's hand and spoke to him in a steady, soothing voice, telling him stories about brave knights and friendly dragons, anything to keep him focused on her voice instead of a struggle to breathe. "The knight is climbing the mountain now," she said as they pulled into the hospital's emergency bay. "He's almost to the dragon's cave, and he's not scared at all because he knows that dragons are just misunderstood creatures who need a friend." 3 weeks after the museum trip, on a Tuesday that started like any other, everything fell apart. The morning had been perfect, one of those golden October days when the leaves seemed to glow like stained glass, and the air held just enough crispness to remind you that winter was coming. Finn had eaten his Mickey Mouse pancakes with his usual enthusiasm, chattering about a presentation he was giving at school about volcanoes. Irvian had listened with genuine interest, offering suggestions and promising to help practice that evening. "Remember," Zelia said as she walked Finn to the car where James waited, "if you start feeling tight in your chest during your presentation, just pause and take 3 deep breaths. Everyone will think you're being dramatic for effect." Finn giggled. "Like I'm an actor." "Exactly like you're an actor," she agreed, kissing the top of his head. "Break a leg, sweetheart." It was 2:47 p.m. when Zelia's phone rang. She was in the garden, deadheading the last of the season's roses and thinking about how much Finn would enjoy helping her plant spring bulbs next month. The sound of her phone cut through the peaceful afternoon like a knife through silk. "Miss Morin," the voice was tense, professional, scared. "This is Nancy Peterson, the school nurse at Bright Minds Academy. You need to come immediately. Finn is having a severe asthma attack." The world tilted sideways. Zelia's training kicked in even as her heart lurched into her throat. "How severe?" she asked, already running toward the house. "What triggered it? What interventions have you tried? His rescue inhaler isn't working. We called 911. The paramedics are on their way, but his oxygen saturation is dropping and he's starting to panic, which is making it worse." "I'm coming," Zelia said, grabbing her keys and the emergency medical kit she kept in her car. "Keep him as calm as you can. Use the nebulizer if you have one. And call his father. Tell him to meet us at St. Mary's Hospital." The 20-minute drive to Finn's school took 8 minutes. Zelia arrived just as the paramedics were loading a small figure on a stretcher into the back of an ambulance. Even from across the parking lot, she could hear the terrible sound of Finn struggling to breathe, the kind of wheeze that made every parent's worst nightmare seem possible. "I'm his nurse," she told the paramedic, climbing into the ambulance without waiting for permission. "Zelia Morin, I have his complete medical history and emergency medications." Finn's eyes found hers through the oxygen mask they'd placed over his face. His lips were blue, his skin pale and clammy, but the relief in his eyes when he saw her was unmistakable. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, taking his hand and trying to project calm even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm here. You're going to be okay." The ride to the hospital was a blur of medical interventions and vital signs and radio chatter between the paramedics and the emergency room. Zelia held Finn's hand and spoke to him in a steady, soothing voice, telling him stories about brave knights and friendly dragons, anything to keep him focused on her voice instead of a struggle to breathe. "The knight is climbing the mountain now," she said as they pulled into the hospital's emergency bay. He's almost to the dragon's cave, and he's not scared at all because he knows that dragons are just misunderstood creatures who need a friend. 2 weeks after Irvian's decision to decline the Tokyo position, the consequences began to unfold like a carefully orchestrated symphony of corporate pressure and family obligation. It started with Richard Ashford's impromptu visit on a Tuesday morning. Zelia was helping Finn with his math homework at the kitchen table when Margaret announced that the chairman of Medicorp's board was waiting in the living room, looking rather stern, if I may say so. Irvian emerged from his office wearing the expression of a man preparing for battle. He kissed Finn's forehead, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the past few weeks, and squeezed Zelia's shoulder as he passed. "This might take a while," he said quietly. "If it gets heated, take Finn upstairs." But Finn, with the acute hearing of a child who'd learned to monitor adult conversations for signs of trouble, was already picking up on the tension in the air. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" he asked, his pencil hovering over his worksheet. "Everything's fine, buddy," Irvian assured him. "Just some boring business stuff. You focus on your math, and I'll be back before you know it." The conversation in the living room was anything but boring, though Irvian tried to keep his voice level for the sake of the small ears 2 rooms away. "I have to say, Irvian, the board is concerned," Richard began, settling into one of the leather armchairs like a king holding court. "We've given you considerable latitude over the years because of your results, but turning down the Tokyo opportunity has raised some serious questions about your commitment to the company's future." "My commitment to Medicorp has never been stronger," Irvian replied evenly. "I've simply realized that effective leadership doesn't require me to be physically present in every market we enter. We have excellent people in our Asian divisions who are perfectly capable of handling the expansion. That's not the point, and you know it. The Japanese specifically requested you. Your reputation, your personal involvement, that's what would have sealed this deal. Without your commitment, they're considering other partnerships." Irvian felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the old anxiety that used to drive him to work 18-hour days and travel 3 weeks out of every month. But underneath it was something new, a quiet certainty that no amount of corporate pressure could shake. "Then they'll have to consider other partnerships," he said. "I'm not moving to Tokyo." Richard leaned forward, his expression shifting from disappointed to calculating. "This is about the boy, isn't it? And that nurse you hired." The mention of Finn and Zelia made something sharp and protective flare in Irvian's chest. "This is about my family, yes. And my realization that there are some things more important than market share and profit margins. More important than the company your father built. More important than the legacy you're supposed to be protecting." It was a low blow, invoking his father's memory, and they both knew it. But instead of the guilt and obligation that such words used to trigger, Irvian felt only sadness for the old man who'd spent his life building an empire and died having never really known his son. "My father built Medicorp," Irvian said quietly, "but he never built a relationship with me. I'm not going to make the same mistake with Finn." The argument continued for another hour, with Richard pulling out every weapon in the corporate arsenal: loyalty, duty, financial projections, board votes, and thinly veiled threats about Irvian's future with the company. Through it all, Irvian remained calm, his resolve strengthening with each attempt to manipulate him back into the life he'd spent decades building and 6 weeks learning to leave behind. But the real test came 3 days later, when Irvian's mother arrived unannounced. Margaret Dahl Sr. was 72 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and capable of reducing grown men to stammering children with a single raised eyebrow. She'd been widowed for 15 years, during which time she transformed from a corporate wife into a formidable force in her own right, serving on numerous boards and wielding influence in social circles that could make or break careers. She was also the one person in the world who could still make Irvian feel like a teenager caught sneaking out after curfew. "Mother," he said, rising from his desk as she swept into his office without knocking, her silver hair perfectly arranged and her designer suit armor against the world's imperfections. "I wasn't expecting you." "Obviously," she replied, settling into the chair across from his desk with a regal bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. If you had been expecting me, you might have prepared an explanation for the absolutely inexplicable decisions you've been making recently. I take it Richard called you. Richard called me. The entire board is concerned, Irvian. You're throwing away everything your father worked for. Everything we've built together. For what? Some midlife crisis. From the kitchen came the sound of Finn's laughter, bright and clear and joyful. Irvian's mother glanced toward the door with an expression that suggested she'd heard something mildly distasteful. It's not a midlife crisis, Mother. It's called being a father. You've been a father for 6 years without it interfering with your professional responsibilities. The words hung in the air between them, honest and ugly and absolutely accurate. Irvian felt the shame of it settle over him like a familiar coat, but this time, instead of wearing it, he shrugged it off. You're right, he said. I've been failing as a father for 6 years. I'm trying to do better. By sabotaging your career, by turning your back on everything that matters, by choosing what actually matters. The door opened then, and Finn peered around the edge, his face bright with curiosity and hope. Daddy, Margaret said, we have a visitor. Is this my grandmother? The silence that followed was deafening. Finn had never met his paternal grandmother, despite her living only 2 hours away. Margaret Sr. had always been too busy when visits were suggested, and Irvian had never pushed, perhaps because some part of him was afraid of exactly this moment. Yes, he said finally. Finn, this is your grandmother. Mother, this is your grandson, Finn. The little boy stepped fully into the room, his natural politeness warring with the uncertainty he clearly felt in the face of this formidable stranger. It's nice to meet you, he said, offering his hand to shake like Margaret had taught him. I'm 6 years old, and I'm in first grade, and I know all about volcanoes. Margaret Sr. stared at the small hand extended toward her, and for a moment, something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, or recognition. But it was gone so quickly that Irvian might have imagined it. Hello, Finn, she said, accepting the handshake with the same gravity she might have shown a business associate. You're quite grown up for 6. Daddy says I'm smart like he was when he was little. We've been building a train set together, and we're going to visit real volcanoes someday. Do you want to see our train set? The invitation was so innocent, so hopeful, that Irvian felt his heart break a little. This was his son's first meeting with his only living grandparent, and Finn was approaching it with the same open-hearted enthusiasm he brought to everything else. I'm afraid I don't have time today, Margaret Sr. said, her voice gentle but firm. I need to speak with your father about some important business matters. Finn's face fell slightly, but he recovered with the resilience that had carried him through 6 years of disappointment. Maybe next time, he said hopefully. I could show you my leaf collection too, and my drawings. And Zalia could make you her special pancakes. Zalia, Margaret Sr.'s voice carried a note of sharp interest. She's my nurse, Finn explained proudly. But she's also kind of like family now. She takes care of me when I'm sick, and she helps me with my homework, and she tells the best stories. She's the best person in the whole world besides Daddy. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Margaret Sr.'s gaze shifted from Finn to Irvian, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes blazing with questions and accusations. I see, she said slowly. Well, Finn, why don't you run along and let the adults talk? Perhaps you could find this Zalia and tell her I'd like to meet her as well. After Finn left, practically bouncing with excitement at the prospect of introducing his grandmother to Zalia, Margaret Sr. turned the full force of her attention back to her son. Now I understand, she said, her voice ice cold. This isn't about fatherhood at all. This is about a woman. It's about both, Irvian said, refusing to be drawn into the trap she was setting. Zalia has helped me become a better father, yes. But even if she weren't in the picture, I wouldn't be moving to Tokyo. I'm done prioritizing work over my son. How convenient that this revelation coincided with the arrival of an attractive young woman in your household. The insinuation hung in the air like poison, and Irvian felt a familiar rage building in his chest. not at the suggestion that he might be attracted to Zelia, but at the implication that his feelings for her somehow invalidated his commitment to his son. "Zelia is a remarkable woman," he said carefully. "She's helped both Finn and me in ways I can't even begin to explain. But my decision to prioritize my family has nothing to do with any romantic feelings I might or might not have." Might or might not have. His mother's eyebrow arched in a way that could have cut glass. "How very definitive of you." Before Irvian could respond, there was a soft knock on the door, and Zelia appeared with Finn beside her, both of them wearing slightly nervous expressions. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Zelia said, "but Finn was very excited about introducing us, and I thought it might be better to get it over with rather than let him worry about it all afternoon." She stepped forward, extending her hand with the same professional courtesy she'd shown Irvian during their first meeting. "I'm Zelia Morin," she said. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Dahl." Margaret Sr. studied the younger woman with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. She saw the natural beauty, the quiet confidence, the way Finn pressed close to Zelia's side as if drawing strength from her presence. She saw the easy familiarity between Zelia and her son, the way they seemed to communicate without words. What she didn't see, because she wasn't looking for it, was the depth of love and sacrifice that had brought Zelia to this family, or the profound healing she'd helped create in the space between a father and son who'd been strangers for too long. "Miss Morin," she said finally, her tone polite but arctic. "I understand you've been quite helpful to our family." "I hope so," Zelia replied, seemingly unaware of the undercurrents swirling around her. "Finn is a remarkable child. It's been a privilege to work with him. And you've been working here for how long?" "About 2 months now." 2 months, Margaret Sr. repeated, as if the timeline confirmed some private suspicion. "And in that short time, you've apparently managed to convince my son to abandon his professional responsibilities." The attack was so sudden and so vicious that for a moment, no one in the room knew how to respond. Finn looked between the adults, confusion and worry clouding his features. Zelia's composure never wavered, but Irvian saw the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested the blow had hit its mark. "Mother," he said, his voice carrying a warning that would have made his board members think twice about their next words. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Zelia said calmly. "I'm here to provide medical care for Finn and to help him manage his asthma. Any decisions Mr. Dahl has made about his career are entirely his own." How wonderfully convenient that his newfound dedication to fatherhood emerged at the exact same time as your arrival. This time, Irvian didn't wait for Zelia to defend herself. He stood up, his entire body radiating the kind of controlled fury that had made him legendary in boardrooms across 3 continents. "That's enough," he said, his voice quiet but deadly. "You will not speak to Zelia that way in my home. You will not make accusations about her motivations or her character. And you will not use your disappointment in my choices as an excuse to attack someone who has done nothing but love and care for your grandson." "Love?" Margaret Sr.'s voice could have frozen fire. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "Yes," Irvian said, and in that moment, he realized he was speaking a truth he'd been afraid to acknowledge even to himself. "Love. Zelia loves Finn, and Finn loves her, and I—" He paused, glancing at the woman who transformed his life and his son's life with her quiet presence and endless compassion. "I love them both." The words hung in the air like a benediction and a declaration of war all at once. Finn's face lit up with a joy so pure it could have powered small cities. Zelia's eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been hope. And Margaret Sr.'s expression hardened into something that could have been carved from stone. "Well," she said, rising from her chair with the dignity of a queen in exile, "I can see that this conversation is pointless. You've clearly made your choices, Irvian. I hope you're prepared to live with the consequences." She paused at the door, looking back at the 3 of them, father, son, and the woman who'd somehow become the bridge between them. "Your father would be ashamed," she said, and walked out of the room with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. In the silence that followed, Finn slipped his hand into Zelia's and looked up at his father with worry etched across his young features. "Is grandmother angry at us?" he asked quietly. Irvian knelt down beside his son, pulling him close while reaching for Zalia's free hand. "Grandmother is scared," he said honestly. "Sometimes when people are scared of change, they say things they don't mean. But what I said is true. I love you both, and nothing anyone says or does will change that. Even if it makes them mad at you. Even if it makes them mad at me." That night, after Finn was safely asleep and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Irvian found Zalia in the garden, sitting on the bench where she often went to think. The October air was crisp enough to make their breath visible, and the stars were so bright they seemed close enough to touch. "I'm sorry about today," he said, settling beside her. "My mother can be difficult when she doesn't get her way. She's protecting you," Zalia said simply, "or what she thinks is best for you. I can understand that. Can you? Because I'm not sure I can. The way she spoke to you, the things she implied." "She's scared," Zalia said, echoing his words to Finn. "She's seen the life you built, the success you achieved, and now it looks like you're throwing it all away for a woman you barely know and a child who—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "A child who's been a source of pain for you because he reminds you of what you lost. Is that what you think? That Finn reminds me of Elena, doesn't he?" Irvian was quiet for a long moment, considering the question he'd never dared ask himself. "He used to," he admitted finally. "Not because he looks like her, but because loving him felt like opening myself up to losing someone else. It was easier to keep my distance than to risk that kind of pain again. And now I know that the pain of losing someone you love is nothing compared to the pain of never really loving them at all. I almost lost 6 years with my son because I was too afraid to be his father. I'm not going to lose any more time because other people think I'm making the wrong choice." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. "I meant what I said in there, Zalia. I love you. I don't know what that means for us or what the future looks like, but I needed you to know." She looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd been transformed by love and loss and the courage to choose differently. "I love you too," she said simply. "I love you, and I love Finn, and I love the family we've created together. But your mother is right about one thing. There will be consequences. Your board, your business relationships, maybe even your financial security. Are you really prepared for that?" "I'm prepared for whatever comes," he said, taking her hand in his. "As long as we face it together." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human fears and dreams. But in the garden of the Dahl estate, under the infinite sky, two people who'd found love in the most unexpected places made promises to each other and to the sleeping child inside the house. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressures, new attempts to pull their small family apart. But tonight, they had each other, and they had hope, and they had the kind of love that makes people brave enough to choose hearts over money, connection over convenience, and the messy, imperfect beauty of real life over the sterile perfection of a life lived in fear. The storm was coming, but they would weather it together. The ultimatum came on a Friday morning, delivered by overnight courier in an envelope bearing the official seal of Medicorp's board of directors. Irvian found it on his desk when he returned from having breakfast with Finn and Zalia, a 30-minute meal that had somehow become the highlight of his days. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead containing 12 lines of text that would force him to choose between the life he'd built and the life he'd discovered. The board of directors of Medicorp Corporation, it began, has voted to offer Chief Executive Officer Irvian Dahl a final opportunity to reconsider his position regarding the Tokyo expansion project. Should Mr. Dahl accept the position of Regional Director for Asian Operations within 72 hours of receipt of this notice, the board will consider the matter closed. Should he decline, the board will convene an emergency session to discuss his continued fitness to serve as CEO of Medicorp Corporation. The language was polite, professional, and absolutely devastating. They were giving him 3 days to choose between his family and his career, and making it clear that he couldn't have both. Irvian set the letter aside and tried to focus on the quarterly reports spread across his desk, but the words kept swimming in front of his eyes. 23 years of his life gone. The company his father had founded, the empire he'd spent decades building, the identity he'd worn like armor since college. All of it balanced on the edge of a decision that shouldn't have been difficult, but somehow was. Not because he didn't know what he wanted to choose, but because he was finally understanding the full weight of what that choice would cost. He was still staring at nothing when Zelia knocked on his office door. "Hey," she said softly, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "Finn's at school, Margaret's at the market, and you look like someone just told you the world is ending. What's wrong?" Without a word, he handed her the letter. She read it twice, her expression growing more troubled with each pass through the formal language and implied threats. 72 hours, she said finally. 72 hours. And if you refuse, they'll vote me out. Richard's been building support for months, probably planning this exact scenario. He knows he has the votes. Zelia sat down in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where his mother had delivered her own ultimatum just days before. "What will you do?" "I know what I want to do," Irvian said. "The question is whether I have the right to do it." "What do you mean?" He gestured toward the window, where the grounds of the estate stretched out in perfectly manicured beauty: tennis court, swimming pool, gardens that required a full-time staff to maintain. This house, Finn's school, his medical care, the trust fund that's supposed to secure his future, it all depends on Medicore. If I lose the company, we lose everything. "Not everything," Zelia said quietly. "Maybe not everything that matters, but everything that provides security. Everything that ensures Finn will never want for anything. Finn wants his father, Irvian. He doesn't care about trust funds or private schools or houses with 15 rooms. He cares about you being there when he wakes up from a nightmare, about you helping him with his homework, about you choosing him over another board meeting. Easy to say when you're not the one responsible for his future." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, and he saw Zelia flinch as if he'd struck her. Immediately, he regretted them, but she was already standing up, her expression carefully neutral. "You're right," she said. "I'm not responsible for his future. I'm just a person who's been taking care of his present while you figured out whether you wanted to be part of it." "Zelia, I didn't mean. I know what you meant, and I know you're scared. But I also know that 6-year-old boy downstairs who worships you, who lights up every time you walk into a room, who spent the first 6 years of his life wondering why his daddy didn't love him enough to stay home for dinner. If you choose Tokyo now, after everything that's happened, after all the progress you made together, what do you think that's going to do to him? I'm trying to provide for him. You're trying to hide from him." The words erupted from her with a force that surprised them both. "You're using financial security as an excuse to go back to the safe, sterile life where you don't have to risk your heart every single day. Where you can tell yourself you're being a good father by paying bills instead of showing up for soccer games. That's not fair. None of this is fair." Zelia's voice cracked with emotion. "It's not fair that you lost Elena. It's not fair that Finn has asthma. It's not fair that your board is forcing you to choose between your family and your career. But you know what? Life isn't fair. It's just life, and you get to decide what kind of life you want to live." She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "I've watched you become the father Finn always needed. I've seen you discover joy and love and all the messy, complicated emotions that make life worth living. Don't throw that away because some men in expensive suits are trying to scare you back into the cage you spent 6 years building around your heart." After she left, Irvian sat alone in his office for 3 hours, staring at the letter and thinking about choices and consequences and the difference between security and safety. At 2 o'clock, his phone rang. "Daddy." Finn's voice was small and scared, the way it got when his asthma was acting up or he'd had a bad dream. "Can you come get me? I don't feel good." Irvian was in the car before Finn finished the sentence. He found his son in the school nurse's office, pale and shaky, clutching his rescue inhaler like a lifeline. "What happened?" Irvian asked, kneeling beside the small cot where Finn was lying. "I don't know," the school nurse said. "He came in about an hour ago complaining of chest tightness. His peak flow is down, but not dangerously so. I think it might be anxiety related." "Anxiety about what?" "There was an incident at lunch," she explained. "Some of the older children were teasing him about having a nurse at home. They said he was a baby who couldn't take care of himself. He got very upset." Irvian felt something savage and protective rise in his chest. "Who?" Which children? Mr. Dahl, I understand you're upset, but Daddy, Finn interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. I told them that having Zelia doesn't make me a baby. I told them she's part of our family now. But they laughed and said families don't hire people to love them. The words hit Irvian like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes and cruel children, the truth that he'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Zelia wasn't just Finn's nurse anymore. She wasn't just an employee who happened to live in their house. She was family, chosen and cherished and irreplaceable. And he was about to lose her because he was too scared to choose love over money. Am I a baby, Daddy? Finn asked, his eyes wide and worried. Because I need help with my breathing? Because I need Zelia? No, buddy, Irvian said, gathering his son into his arms. You're not a baby. You're the bravest person I know. And needing help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. We all need help sometimes. Do you need help sometimes? Yeah, Irvian admitted, thinking about the woman waiting at home who'd helped him remember how to be a father, how to be happy, how to be fully alive. I need help all the time. Is that why you have Zelia too? That's exactly why I have Zelia too. They drove home in comfortable silence, with Finn's breathing gradually returning to normal and Irvian's mind finally achieving the clarity that had eluded him all morning. He found Zelia in the kitchen, preparing Finn's afternoon snack with the same care and attention she brought to everything else. She looked up when they entered, her eyes immediately scanning Finn for signs of distress. How are you feeling, sweetheart? She asked, placing a gentle hand on his forehead. Better, Finn said, settling onto his usual stool at the breakfast bar. Daddy explained that needing help is okay, and that you're part of our family. Is that what Daddy said? Zelia's eyes met Irvian's across the kitchen, and he saw hope there, carefully guarded but unmistakable. Actually, Irvian said, what Daddy said was that he's been an idiot who almost made the biggest mistake of his life. He pulled the board's letter from his pocket and set on the counter between them. I'm not going to Tokyo, he said. I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving Finn, and I'm not going back to the life I had before you both taught me what living actually means. But your job will probably be gone by Monday. And you know what? I don't care. I've got enough money saved to last us years, even if we have to sell this house and move somewhere smaller. What I can't afford to lose is this family, this love, this chance to be the man I was always supposed to be. Are you sure? Zelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Zelia Morin. I love you completely and desperately and permanently. I love the way you take care of Finn, the way you've taken care of me, the way you've made this house feel like a home. I love your strength and your compassion and your terrible habit of being right about everything that matters. Finn was bouncing in his seat, his face radiant with joy. Does this mean Zelia gets to stay forever? If she wants to, Irvian said, never taking his eyes off the woman who'd changed everything. If she's willing to take on two guys who need a lot of help figuring out this family thing. I can't think of anything I'd rather do, she said, and then she was in his arms, and he was kissing her like a man who'd been drowning and suddenly found air. Does this mean you're going to be my new mommy? Finn asked, and both adults laughed through their tears. I'm going to be whatever you need me to be, Zelia told him. But first, I'm going to be your daddy's girlfriend, and we're going to figure out the rest as we go. Can we still go see the volcanoes? We can go see every volcano on the planet if you want to, Irvian promised. That night, as they tucked Finn into bed together for the first time as an official family, the little boy asked one more question. Daddy, are you scared about losing your job? A little, Irvian admitted. But you know what I'm not scared of anymore? What? I'm not scared of loving you both so much that it might hurt someday. Because loving you, really loving you, is the only thing that's ever made me feel completely alive. Monday morning would bring phone calls and lawyers and the complicated process of untangling himself from the life he'd spent decades building. But tonight, he had everything that mattered. A son who trusted him, a woman who loved him, and the kind of happiness that no board of directors could ever vote away. For the first time in his adult life, Irvian Dahl was exactly where he belonged. 6 months after the board meeting that cost Irvian his position as CEO of Medicore, the Dahl family was having breakfast in the kitchen of their new home. A comfortable 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood where children rode bicycles on tree-lined streets and neighbors knew each other's names. It was a far cry from the mansion they'd left behind. But as Irvian watched Finn carefully arrange fresh strawberries on his pancakes while chattering about his upcoming science fair project, he couldn't remember ever feeling richer. Mrs. Peterson says my volcano project is the most creative she's ever seen, Finn was saying, his face glowing with pride. And she wants to know if you could come talk to our class about real volcanoes, Daddy. I'd love to, Irvian replied, refilling Zalia's coffee cup and stealing a quick kiss when she smiled her thanks. But I should probably warn you that I haven't studied volcanoes since I was your age. That's okay. We can study together. Zalia bought us 3 new books about volcanology, and there's a documentary we can watch tonight. The easy way Finn included both adults in his plans still caught Irvian off guard sometimes. After years of being a peripheral figure in his son's life, the assumption of togetherness felt like a daily miracle. Speaking of tonight, Zalia said, glancing at the calendar on the refrigerator, don't forget we have dinner with my parents at 6. I'm not nervous, Irvian said automatically. Nobody said you were nervous, Zalia laughed. But the fact that you felt the need to announce it suggests otherwise. I want them to like me, he admitted. I want them to know that I'm good enough for their daughter. They already know that, she assured him. My mother's exact words were, any man who gives up $1 billion company for love is either crazy or perfect for you. And knowing you, probably both. The transition hadn't been without its challenges. Leaving Medicore had meant saying goodbye to a salary that could have funded small countries, but it had also meant freedom from the crushing pressure of board meetings and shareholder expectations. Irvian had used his severance package and personal savings to start a consulting firm specializing in medical technology. Smaller, more personal, and infinitely more fulfilling than running a corporate empire. The new business operated out of a converted garage behind their house, where Irvian worked reasonable hours and never missed dinner. He'd hired 3 employees, all of them former Medicore executives who'd been frustrated by the company's increasingly profit-driven culture, and together they were building something that prioritized innovation over income. We got another referral yesterday, he told Zalia as they cleaned up the breakfast dishes. A startup in Boston that's developing a new kind of inhaler for children with asthma. They want our help with the FDA approval process. That's wonderful, she said, and he could hear the pride in her voice. You're going to help a lot of kids breathe easier. We're going to help them, he corrected. I couldn't do any of this without your input on the medical side. It was true. Zalia had become more than just his partner in life. She was his partner in business as well, providing the clinical expertise that helped him understand not just the regulatory requirements of medical devices, but their real-world impact on patients and families. She'd also returned to part-time work at the Children's Hospital, splitting her time between Irvian's business and her calling as a pediatric nurse. Finn had been worried at first that she was leaving him, but she'd explained that helping other sick children was part of who she was, and that understanding had only made him prouder of her. Besides, she'd told him, you're not my only patient anymore. You're my family. And family doesn't need me to hover over them every second of the day. They just need me to be there when they really need me. The adjustment to their new neighborhood had been easier than anyone expected. Finn had made friends with the children on their street, including a girl named Emma who also had asthma and thought inhalers were totally cool instead of totally embarrassing. Their shared condition had formed the basis of a friendship that had helped Finn see his illness not as something that made him different, but as something that connected him to others. Emma's mom wants to know if we can have a play date this weekend, Finn announced as Zalia walked him to the school bus. She has a trampoline, but she says I can still jump on it as long as I have my inhaler. That sounds like fun, Zalia agreed. We'll talk to Emma's mom about it. And maybe her mom could come to dinner sometime? She's really nice, and she knows a lot about asthma because Emma's had it since she was a baby. Watching his son navigate social situations with confidence and openness, Irvian marveled at the transformation. The quiet, careful child who'd hidden behind staircases and whispered his needs had become a boy who made friends easily and advocated for himself without shame. "He's so different," he said to Zelia as they watched the school bus disappear around the corner. "He's not different," she corrected. "He's just not afraid anymore. He knows he's loved unconditionally, so he feels safe being himself. Is that what love does? Makes us brave enough to be ourselves. It's what the right kind of love does." They walked back to the house hand in hand, comfortable in the routine they'd built together. Irvian would work in his office until noon, then take a break to have lunch with Zelia before she left for the hospital. In the afternoon, he'd pick up Finn from school, and they'd spend an hour together before Zelia returned home. Dinner was always at 6, followed by homework, bath time, and stories, a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. "I have something to tell you," Zelia said as they settled into Irvian's office with their second cups of coffee. "Good something or bad something? Good something. Great something, actually." She pulled an envelope from her purse, her face glowing with excitement. "I got accepted." "Accepted where?" But even as he asked, he was remembering the application she'd been working on for months, the dream she'd been afraid to voice out loud. "The nurse practitioner program at Yale. They're offering me a full scholarship, Irvian. I could get my master's degree, specialize in pediatric respiratory care, maybe even teach someday." "Zelia, that's incredible." He pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the small office. "I'm so proud of you. When do you start?" "That's the thing. It's a 2-year program, but they offer evening and weekend classes for working professionals. I could keep my job at the hospital, keep helping with your business, and still be here for dinner every night." "You don't have to keep working for me," he said seriously. "This is your dream, your career. I want you to focus on whatever makes you happiest." "What makes me happiest is this," she said, gesturing around the office where medical journals were stacked next to family photos and Finn's artwork decorated the walls alongside Irvian's business certificates. "This life we've built together. I don't want to choose between my professional goals and my family. I want to find a way to have both. Then we'll make it work," he promised. "Whatever you need, scheduled changes, childcare help, someone to handle dinner on the nights you have classes, we'll figure it out together." That afternoon, when Finn came home from school, they told him about Zelia's acceptance to the program. His reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "You're going to be a student again? That's so cool. Can I help you study? I'm really good at making flashcards." "I would love your help," Zelia said, pulling him onto her lap. "But are you okay with me being busier some evenings? With having less time for just the 3 of us? Are you still going to live here?" Finn asked. "Of course. Are you still going to be my family? Always." "Then it's okay. Besides, Daddy says that when people you love are following their dreams, you should help them, not hold them back." "When did Daddy say that?" Irvian asked, not remembering the conversation. "When I asked if you were sad about not being a CEO anymore. You said you weren't sad because now you get to help people instead of just making money, and that's what you always dreamed about when you were little. You said sometimes the best thing you can do for people you love is let them become who they're supposed to be." The wisdom of his own words, reflected back through his son's clear perception, hit Irvian like a revelation. He'd been so focused on the practical aspects of their new life that he'd forgotten to acknowledge the deeper truth. They weren't just surviving the loss of his old career. They were thriving because of it. "You know what?" he said, pulling both Finn and Zelia into a group hug. "I think we should celebrate. How about we go out for dinner tonight instead of cooking? Somewhere fancy where they have cloth napkins and bread that comes in a basket. Can we get appetizers?" Finn asked hopefully. "We can get whatever you want," Irvian promised. "This is a big day for our family. Zelia's going back to school. I have a new client who's going to help kids with asthma, and you're going to be the best study buddy a nurse practitioner student ever had. What about you, Daddy? What are you celebrating?" Irvian looked around the small office where he'd built a business based on passion instead of profit, then at the 2 people who'd taught him the difference between success and happiness. "I'm celebrating the fact that I finally figured out what I want to be when I grow up," he said. "A good father, a good partner, and a good man. Everything else is just details." That night, at a small Italian restaurant where the owner's wife made fresh pasta and the servers treated every customer like family, The dolls celebrated their future. They talked about Zalia's classes and Irvian's new clients and Finn's plans for the science fair. They made lists of volcanoes they wanted to visit and books they wanted to read together. And as Irvian watched his son teach Zalia how to twirl spaghetti on her fork while she laughed at his increasingly elaborate instructions, he realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of challenges or uncertainty, but the presence of people who made every challenge worth facing. 6 months ago, he'd been a billionaire CEO with a corner office and a reputation that opened doors around the world. Tonight, he was a small business owner with paint-stained fingers and a 6-year-old's artwork on his refrigerator. He'd never been richer in his life. 1 year later, on a crisp Saturday morning in October, Irvian woke to the sound of whispered conversations and suppressed giggles coming from the kitchen downstairs. He glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m., earlier than anyone in the doll household typically stirred on weekends. Then at the empty space beside him, where Zalia usually slept, conspiracy was afoot, and he had a pretty good idea what it was about. He'd been planning this day for months, carrying the small velvet box in his jacket pocket for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to ask the question that would make their unconventional family official. But it seemed that his co-conspirators had plans of their own. "Daddy," Finn's voice called from downstairs. "You need to come down here, right now. It's important." Irvian pulled on his robe and made his way to the kitchen, where he found a scene that made his heart swell to near bursting. Zalia stood at the stove, flipping pancakes shaped like hearts, while Finn arranged fresh flowers in a mason jar centerpiece. The table was set with their best dishes, and there was a hand-drawn banner hanging between the cabinets that read "Happy Family Day" in Finn's careful 7-year-old handwriting. "What's all this?" Irvian asked, though he was pretty sure he knew. "It's the anniversary of when Zalia came to live with us," Finn explained, practically vibrating with excitement. "She said we should celebrate it like a holiday because it's the day our real family started." "Our real family," Irvian repeated, looking at Zalia, who was blushing prettily over the pancake griddle. "I may have gotten a little sentimental," she admitted. "But it's true, isn't it? A year ago today, I walked through that front door not knowing I was about to find the 2 people who would change my life completely." "You changed our lives," Irvian said, moving to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "In the best possible way." "That's what I told her," Finn chimed in. "I said we were just sad and lonely before, but now we're happy all the time. Well, except when I have to do math homework. But even then, at least I'm not sad and doing math homework." They all laughed at his logic, and Irvian felt that familiar rush of gratitude for this life they'd built together. The past year had brought changes none of them could have predicted. Zalia had excelled in her nurse practitioner program. His consulting business had grown beyond his wildest expectations, and Finn had blossomed into a confident, articulate child who approached the world with curiosity instead of fear. "I have something for both of you," Finn announced suddenly, disappearing into the living room and returning with 2 wrapped packages. "I made them myself, with help from Mrs. Rodriguez next door." Zalia opened hers first, revealing a photo album filled with pictures from their year together. Snapshots of family dinners, trips to the science museum, quiet moments reading on the couch, and adventures exploring their new neighborhood. On the cover, in Finn's careful handwriting, were the words "Our Family Story." "Finn, this is beautiful," she said, tears gathering in her eyes as she flipped through the pages. "When did you take all these pictures?" "I've been collecting them all year," he said proudly. "Every time we did something fun together, I asked someone to take a picture or use Daddy's phone. Mrs. Rodriguez helped me print them and put them in the book." Irvian's gift was similar but different, a hand-drawn comic book titled The Adventures of Super Dad, featuring a superhero who gained his powers not from radioactive spiders or alien DNA, but from learning how to love his son. In the story, Finn explained, Super Dad starts out really weak because he's afraid to use his love powers. But then he meets a magical nurse who teaches him that love makes you stronger, not weaker. And by the end, he's the most powerful superhero in the world because he's not afraid to love people anymore. Irvian had to set the comic book aside and clear his throat several times before he could speak. "This is the best gift anyone has ever given me," he said finally. "Thank you, buddy. You're welcome. But I'm not done yet." Finn's expression grew serious, and he looked back and forth between the two adults. "I have something really important to ask you both." "What is it, sweetheart?" Zelia asked, settling into her chair at the breakfast table. "Well," Finn began, fidgeting with his napkin, "I've been thinking about our family and how we're perfect just the way we are, but also how sometimes it would be nice if we were officially official, you know?" "Officially official," Irvian repeated, his hand unconsciously moving toward his jacket pocket where the ring box waited. "Like if Zelia was really, truly, legally my mom, and if you were really, truly, legally married, so that nobody could ever say we're not a real family." The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of pancakes sizzling on the griddle. Zelia's eyes widened with surprise, and Irvian felt his carefully planned proposal speech evaporate from his mind. "I know it's a big thing to ask," Finn continued, his voice growing smaller. "And I know that just because I want something doesn't mean it's what you want. But I thought maybe if I asked really nicely and explained how much it would mean to me." "Finn," Zelia said gently, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Are you asking me to marry your daddy?" "I'm asking if you want to marry him," Finn corrected. "Because I can tell you both want to, but you're too scared to say it out loud. Adults are weird that way. They think everything has to be perfect and planned and official before they can be happy about it." Out of the mouths of babes, Irvian murmured, then louder, "You know what, buddy? You're absolutely right. We are being weird about it." He stood up and walked over to where his jacket hung on the back of a chair, retrieving the small velvet box that had been burning a hole in his pocket for weeks. When he turned back to the table, both Finn and Zelia were watching him with expressions of breathless anticipation. "I had this whole elaborate plan," he said, kneeling beside Zelia's chair. "I was going to take you to the place where we had our first official date, wait for the perfect sunset, give some incredibly romantic speech about how you complete me and make me a better man." "That sounds really nice," Zelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It would have been nice," Irvian agreed. "But this is better. This is real. This is us. Messy and imperfect, and absolutely right." He opened the box, revealing a simple solitaire diamond that caught the morning light streaming through the kitchen window. "Zelia Morin," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm him, "will you marry me? Will you officially, legally, permanently be part of this crazy family we've created? Will you be my wife and Finn's mom and the person we get to love for the rest of our lives?" "Yes," she said, and then she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Finn let out a whoop of joy that probably woke the entire neighborhood. And then all three of them were hugging and crying and laughing in the middle of the kitchen while the heart-shaped pancakes burned on the stove. "This is the best family day ever," Finn declared. "Wait until I tell Emma and Mrs. Rodriguez and everyone at school. I'm going to have a real mom." "You already had a real mom," Zelia corrected gently, sliding the ring on her finger and marveling at how perfectly it fit. "Now you're going to have a real mom with a marriage certificate. And a real dad who's not afraid to show his love powers," Finn added, referencing his comic book. "And a real family that's going to be together forever," Irvian said, pulling them both close again. Later that morning, after they'd eaten the slightly burned pancakes and called everyone they knew to share the news, they found themselves in the backyard, sitting on the old wooden swing that had come with the house. Finn was chasing butterflies through the garden, his laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. "Can you believe it's only been a year?" Zelia asked, her head resting on Irvian's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like we've been together forever," he replied. "And sometimes it feels like it all happened yesterday. I keep thinking about that first night when Finn asked me to stay with him. If I'd known then what I know now, what would you have done differently?" "Nothing," she said immediately. "Not a single thing. Even knowing how hard it would be sometimes, how many people would disapprove, how much we'd all have to change, I'd do it all exactly the same way. Even the part where I was a complete emotional disaster who almost chose money over love. especially that part, because watching you learn to open your heart, seeing you become the father Finn always needed, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. I love you, he said, the words as natural as breathing now. I love you so much it sometimes scares me. Good scared or bad scared? Good scared. The kind of scare that means you've found something worth protecting. As the afternoon sun painted their small backyard in shades of gold and amber, Irvian thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a successful but empty man, living in a mansion that felt like a mausoleum, watching his son from a distance and calling it protection. Now he was sitting on a second-hand swing in a modest backyard, watching his son play in the garden while his future wife planned their simple wedding, and he'd never felt more successful in his life. "Daddy, Zelia," Finn called from across the yard. "Come see what I found." They walked over to where he was kneeling beside the flower bed, carefully cupping something in his small hands. "It's a butterfly cocoon," he explained excitedly. "Mrs. Rodriguez says it's almost ready to hatch. She says the butterfly has been growing inside there all summer, getting ready to come out and be beautiful." "That's amazing, sweetheart," Zelia said, kneeling beside him to examine the cocoon. "It reminds me of us," Finn said matter-of-factly. "We were all stuck in our sad cocoons before, but then we found each other and learned how to come out and be a family. And now we're beautiful, just like the butterfly will be." Irvian looked at his son, this wise, wonderful child who saw the world in metaphors and magic, and felt his heart expand to accommodate another wave of love. "You know what, buddy?" he said, kneeling down beside them both. "I think you're exactly right. We did learn how to come out of our cocoons, and we are beautiful." That night, as they tucked Finn into bed on the anniversary of the day that changed everything, he asked them one final question. "When you get married, will anything change? Will we still have family day every year? Will we still make volcano pancakes on Sundays? Will you still read me stories about brave knights and friendly dragons?" "Nothing important will change," Zelia promised. "We'll still be us, just with matching rings and a piece of paper that makes it official. And maybe," Irvian added, "we'll add some new traditions, like anniversary celebrations and family vacations to see real volcanoes, and bedtime stories about princesses who save kingdoms and nurses who save hearts." "I'd like that," Finn said sleepily. "I'd like new traditions. But mostly I just like us." "We like us too," Zelia said, kissing his forehead. "Sweet dreams, my beautiful boy." As they turned off the lights and closed the door, Irvian realized that this was what happily ever after actually looked like. Not a fairy tale ending, but a daily choice to love each other through all the ordinary moments that make up a life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to choose love over fear. But tonight, in their imperfect house with their imperfect family and their perfectly imperfect love, they had everything they needed. The butterfly would emerge from its cocoon when it was ready, just as they had emerged from theirs when the time was right. And like that butterfly, they would spend the rest of their lives proving that sometimes the most beautiful transformations happen not in spite of our struggles, but because of them. 6 months later, on a perfect May morning when the world seemed painted in watercolors and possibility, the Dahl family gathered in the backyard of their small colonial home to celebrate the wedding that would make their love official in the eyes of the law, though it had been official in their hearts for much longer. The ceremony was small, intimate, and perfectly them. Zelia's parents had flown in from Chicago, bringing with them the kind of warm, enveloping love that explained everything about their daughter's capacity for compassion. Her mother, Sarah, had spent the morning helping with last-minute preparations while her father, David, regaled Finn with stories about Zelia's childhood adventures as a wannabe doctor who performed surgery on every stuffed animal in the house. She once convinced her little brother that his teddy bear needed an appendectomy, David was telling Finn as they arranged folding chairs in neat rows across the lawn. She used her mother's sewing kit to make the incision and then operated for 2 hours, giving us a full medical commentary the entire time. "That sounds like Zelia," Finn giggled. "She still talks like a doctor sometimes, but she always explains it so I can understand." "That's because she's always been good at taking care of people," David said, his voice full of paternal pride. Even when she was your age, she was the one everyone came to when they got hurt or scared. Margaret, their former housekeeper, had also made the journey from Connecticut, bringing with her a wedding cake she'd insisted on making herself despite Zalia's protest that they could just order something simple. The 3-tier vanilla confection with buttercream roses was a work of art that looked almost too beautiful to eat. "This is my gift to you," she'd said when she arrived that morning, tears in her eyes as she hugged first Finn, then Zalia, then Irvian. "Watching you three become a family has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. I couldn't miss the chance to celebrate it properly." Even Richard Ashford had surprised everyone by sending a generous wedding gift along with a note that read, "Perhaps I was wrong about what constitutes success. Wishing you all the happiness in the world." It was the closest thing to an apology Irvian was likely to get from his former colleague, and he found he was grateful for the gesture. The officiant was Dr. Martinez, who had watched their family's journey from those frightening early days in the hospital emergency room to this moment of pure joy. She stood beneath an arch of white roses and baby's breath that the neighbors had helped construct, her kind face beaming as she watched the small gathering of people who had come to witness love triumph over fear. "Dearly beloved," she began, "we are gathered here today not just to witness the union of two people, but to celebrate the creation of family built on love, trust, and the kind of courage it takes to choose each other every single day." Irvian stood at the makeshift altar wearing a simple navy suit and a smile that hadn't left his face all morning. Beside him, Finn fidgeted with the ring bearer's pillow, his 7-year-old frame practically vibrating with excitement in his miniature tuxedo. Both males had matching boutonnieres made from sunflowers. Finn's choice because sunflowers always look happy, just like our family. When the music began, a simple acoustic guitar played by one of Zalia's nursing school classmates, everyone turned to watch the bride make her entrance. Zalia walked down the aisle alone, having chosen to give herself away because, as she'd explained to her parents, "I'm not property to be transferred from one man to another. I'm a woman making a choice to share my life with the people I love most." She wore a simple white dress that fell just below her knees, with cap sleeves and a flowing skirt that caught the morning breeze. Her hair was styled in soft curls, adorned with a single white rose from the garden, and she carried a bouquet of mixed wildflowers that she and Finn had picked together that morning. But it was her face that took everyone's breath away, radiant with joy, confident in her choice, absolutely glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. When she reached the altar, Finn stepped forward to take her hand, as they'd rehearsed. "I give Zalia to Daddy," he announced solemnly, "and I give Daddy to Zalia, because they love each other and they love me, and that's what families do. They give their love to each other." There wasn't a dry eye in the small gathering as Dr. Martinez began the ceremony with words she'd written specifically for this unique family. "Love," she said, "is not always the fairy tale we imagine as children. Sometimes it comes disguised as duty, as care, as the simple act of showing up when someone needs you most. The love story we're celebrating today began not with hearts and flowers, but with a sick child, a worried father, and a nurse who understood that healing happens not just in the body, but in the soul." She looked at each of them in turn. Irvian, his eyes never leaving Zalia's face. Zalia, her hands still entwined with Finn's, and Finn, who was listening to every word with the serious attention he brought to everything important. What started as a professional relationship became something deeper, something rarer, a love that transformed not just two people, but three. A love that proved that families aren't just born. They're chosen, they're built, they're nurtured into existence through countless small acts of devotion and care. The vows they exchanged were personal, heartfelt, and absolutely perfect for the people they'd become together. Irvian spoke first, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Zalia, when you walked into our house that first day, I thought I was hiring a nurse for my son. I had no idea I was welcoming home the missing piece of our family. You didn't just teach me how to be a better father. You taught me how to be a better man. You showed me that love isn't something to be feared or rationed. or hidden away for safekeeping. Love is meant to be lived, shared, celebrated every single day. He paused, glancing at Finn, who was nodding encouragingly. You love my son as if he were your own, and you love me despite all my flaws and fears and terrible habit of overthinking everything. You've made our house a home, our routines into traditions, our separate lives into one beautiful, messy, perfect story. I promise to love you not just today, but every day for the rest of our lives. I promise to support your dreams, to share your burdens, to laugh at your jokes even when they're terrible, and to never, ever take for granted the miracle of being loved by you. Zalia's vows were equally moving, delivered through tears of joy that she made no attempt to hide. Irvian, I came to work for you, but I stayed because I fell in love, not just with you, but with the man I watched you become when you finally let yourself be vulnerable. I watched you transform from someone who was afraid to love into someone who loves so completely, so generously, that it takes my breath away. She looked down at Finn, who was beaming up at her with undisguised adoration. And Finn, my brave, beautiful boy, you were never just my patient or my responsibility. From that very first night when you whispered, I love you in the darkness, you've been my son in every way that matters. You taught me that love doesn't always come in the packages we expect, and that sometimes the most perfect families are the ones we create by choosing each other. She turned back to Irvian, her voice growing stronger. I promise to love you both fiercely and faithfully. I promise to be your partner in all things, in raising our son, in building our dreams, in facing whatever challenges life brings our way. I promise to remember that we are not just husband and wife, but teammates, co-conspirators, and best friends. And I promise to never let either of you forget how incredibly loved you are. When Dr. Martinez asked for the rings, Finn stepped forward with the pillow, his role as ring bearer one he'd been practicing for weeks. These rings, the officiant explained, are symbols of the promises you made to each other. They have no beginning and no end, like the love that binds you together. They are made of precious metal, refined through fire, just as your love has been refined through the challenges you've faced together. As Irvian slipped the simple gold band onto Zalia's finger, he whispered words meant only for her. With this ring, I thee wed, and all my worldly goods I thee endow. All your worldly goods? She whispered back with a smile. That's a pretty big commitment from someone who used to be a billionaire. My worldly goods are you and Finn and this life we've built, he replied. Everything else is just stuff. When Zalia placed his ring on his finger, she added her own quiet words. This ring is my promise that wherever you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, your dreams will be my dreams, and your love will be my home. Dr. Martinez smiled at the couple before her, then looked out at the small gathering of family and friends who had come to witness this moment. By the power vested in me by the state of Connecticut, and by the power of the love that brought you together, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Irvian, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was sweet, tender, and full of promises for the future. When they broke apart, Finn let out a cheer that was immediately taken up by everyone present, and suddenly the backyard was filled with applause, laughter, and the kind of joy that makes the whole world seem brighter. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Martinez announced, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Dahl and their son Finn, a family united by love, strengthened by adversity, and blessed with the kind of happiness that comes from choosing each other every single day. The reception was held right there in the backyard, with tables set up under string lights that would twinkle like stars when evening came. Margaret's cake was indeed too beautiful to cut, but they managed anyway, with Finn helping to serve pieces to all their guests while regaling them with stories about how he'd known his parents were meant to be together, because they looked at each other the way people look at puppies, like they just wanted to cuddle them forever. As the afternoon melted into evening and the guests began to mingle and share stories, Irvian found himself standing at the edge of the garden, watching his new wife dance with his son to music streaming from someone's phone. They were laughing about something, their heads close together, and the sight filled him with a contentment so deep it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. You look happy, a voice said behind him, and he turned to find Dr. Martinez approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. "I am happy," he said, accepting the drink. "Happier than I ever thought possible. You know, in all my years of practicing medicine, I've learned that the best healing happens not in hospitals, but in moments like this. When people choose love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over despair. Zelia did that for us," Irvian said. "She chose to love us when we were both pretty unlovable. She chose to see your potential," Dr. Martinez corrected. "But you did the hard work of becoming the man and father you were meant to be. That's not something anyone can do for you. That's something you have to choose for yourself every single day." As if summoned by their conversation, Zelia appeared at Irvian's side, slightly breathless from dancing, but glowing with happiness. "Your son," she said, "has just informed me that he thinks we should have a baby brother or sister, so he can teach them everything he knows about being part of our family." "Oh, did he now?" Irvian raised an eyebrow. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that these are the kinds of decisions grown-ups make together, after lots of talking and planning and making sure everyone is ready for such a big change. And he said, 'Well, start talking and planning because I'm definitely ready.'" They all laughed, and Irvian pulled his wife closer, marveling at how natural it felt to think of her that way. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. "About talking and planning. I think," Zelia said, looking out at their small gathering of family and friends, at the home they'd built together, at the life they'd created from love and courage and a willingness to trust in something bigger than themselves. "I think we should definitely talk about it. But not tonight. Tonight is for celebrating the family we already have. Tonight and every night," Irvian agreed, kissing her temple. "For the rest of our lives," as the sun set over their small backyard wedding, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The newly official Dahl family stood together watching their guests enjoy the simple celebration of their love. They were surrounded by the people who mattered most in the place they'd chosen to call home, living the life they'd built together one choice at a time. It wasn't the fairy tale any of them had imagined as children. It was better. It was real, complicated, imperfect, and absolutely beautiful. It was a love story that had started with a sick child and a frightened father and a nurse who understood that sometimes the best medicine is simply showing up with an open heart. And as Finn ran back to them, grass stains on his tiny tuxedo and joy lighting up his face like sunrise, as Zelia laughed at something he whispered in her ear, as Irvian felt the familiar rush of gratitude for this impossible, perfect life they'd created together, he knew that this was just the beginning. They had forever ahead of them, forever to love each other, to build dreams together, to face whatever challenges came their way as a team. Forever to prove that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose, the ones we fight for, the ones we create from nothing but love and the courage to believe in something better. Forever begins now, he thought, pulling his wife and son close as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. And he couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring.